The first thing is even just as we're entering, so even just the movement of bodies and how to prepare you for engaging with the art in a certain way. Like for me, if it's open and you walk in and you walk out, it doesn't have the respect or the time that I feel like the work, requires. So just this long journey getting darker and darker, the journey kind of begins out here before the art's even there. So yeah, please enjoy this walkthrough, I quite enjoy it. We've got 3 films here. It's Bring Me to Heel 1, Bring Me to Heel 2 and Chainmail 3. As a black man, I always knew about self-hate and how that might show up, but I didn't realize how much self-hate I had with regards to my white ancestry. I was trying to imagine where a lot of the resistance from my white ancestry and even the country, the white English country, is to all of the pain and damage that we've caused and why we can't sit more humbly at the table to understand how to redress that balance, So Bring Me to Heal, the whole process of that was exploring the healing kind of vocabulary, I guess, that I was exposed to growing up. That was developed by a lot of black communities, so Rastafarian and African communities, and trying to apply that to my white side of things. So we have this hair garment, which for me kind of embodied that whole process, which was 100% human hair. I'm quite proud of it actually. One wig company called Shepperton Wig Company, and these women have been dedicated their whole life to wig making. They're incredible craftspeople. And they said that they would take it on. Kevin Fortune, incredible hairdresser, who had to install the garment and dress it each time it needs to be dressed. He loved the project. There was a lot of healing in it for him because we just spent hours there. I say we, he was plaiting, I was making the dreadlocks. Sitting there for hours, cleaning this hair, nurturing this object. Even over Christmas, the women were adding each hair individually by hand. There is hundreds of thousands of hair strands in there. All with different DNA of people as well, which for me is something that's quite almost unfathomable, It's about real people, real life, real history.
Amartey, thank you so much for the walkthrough and unpacking your work. I was thinking about, okay, where do we start? And I was thinking maybe history is a good place because you reference it quite a lot in your work. I'm curious if you could unpack for us a little more what draws you to that way of thinking and way of working, going to history.
What's really interesting when you start looking at the history, but also with a background understanding of colonialism anyway, you start to see so many patterns, right? So when the Romans first came over, the way that they talked about the native Britons was the same way that they would talk almost slurs about Africa, thousands of years later when they came over. One thing that I found also very interesting when the Romans first came to Britain was that they made a beeline all the way to Wales for Anglesey Abbey, which was the Druidic center point, right? Because there was no writing, the Druids held all of the knowledge, right? Because it was all oral traditions. And so they went straight there and they destroyed the hub of Druidic knowledge. And so after that, then they came back and took the culture away and stuff. And it's very interesting because obviously when we go over, went over, more recently, with the English Empire, we did very similar things, right? Attack people's cultures, their ability to practice their own culture, destroy the living libraries, ultimately. And then you know that your culture and your understanding of who you are is going to go. And so being able to see those parallels was just so fascinating to me. But obviously the Romans came, and that was literally 2,000, maybe a little bit less, years ago. And then after that, we had a lot of different waves of invaders. The most recent is the Norman invasion in 1066. And even though that happened nearly 1,000 years ago, there was a recent article, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, in The Guardian, that just looked at, from the Norman conquest, where the distribution of wealth in the UK still is. And 80% of the land is still owned by that same Norman conquest from all those years ago.
You've seen this continuity.
It's still there, and it still affects us every day. But we're so disconnected from our own past. And I think that disconnection from our own past also makes it harder for us to relate to other people's grasp of their own history.
It's always very interesting, and I think in this moment, the way we look at museums as another place where this violence and the history of this violence is being displayed and is being kind of presented, and how we are changing that. So in your work, one of the videos, Bring Me to Heal Too, where the being walks through the Victoria and Albert Museum. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how that happened and how that came about as a place where history lives in another way, but also the place where that violence is made visible.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the V&A, I got taken there a lot by my mum when I was a kid. And it's somewhere that I'm quite in love with, I'm enamored by it, you know. It still has that feeling of awe when I go in there. I think one of the things that resonated a lot with me is that it's art, but it's also craft. It's just human creativity, and that really resonates with me. So I came to the V&A by a kind of feeling of nostalgia that took me there. You know, I love this place on one hand, but it's also such a violent thing on the other. And again, like talking about embodying the things that are unhealthy and acknowledging that, that was a good, really nice starting point there. It came about quite magically, but I won't go into that too much. And what I wanted to do is show all of the objects that we're so used to, but frame them in a way where it just exposes the violence that we're so desensitized to, because our history is pure, unadulterated, zombie apocalypse levels violent, right? But we don't see it anymore because it is who we are, right? I just wanted to open up to myself as well as maybe an audience to just say, this is our history. These are the objects that we come in and look at with all of this like, but what is inside them is extremely violent and graphic, but we don't see it that way. We still see them as beautiful, you know, relics, you know.
I want to pick up on the materiality in your work because I've read where you've said you enjoy working in crafts or approaches that you're not formally trained in.
Yeah.
And when we look at the garments here, the same can be said for how those were created. So tell us about your process of working through skills and disciplines that are not formally yours, and what it means to then have to collaborate to achieve these works.
Most of my ideas are so collaborative. Everything that we do is based on other people helping us along the way. Yeah. And so being able to work so collaboratively makes stuff that when I'm walking in there now, I can be in awe and I can say, wow, look what we did. You know, rather than just, oh, I made this. Yeah. Personally, I feel that the arts, at least how I grew up experiencing the arts and then looking at universities and the arts that they were making, I feel like the arts is, I wouldn't say dead, but broken, right, on life support. And I think one of the barriers to that for me is the idea of formal training, having to know this, that, and jump through this and this and this hoop. And also the cultural associations that underpin the arts in a way that would stop access to a lot of people. And so for me, my understanding of art and an art is a way of being. It's a way of moving through the world and seeing and connecting things. And there's no university that can create that. That's why for me, I like using materials that I didn't study in. To say, you know what, there is something through that beautiful naivety, through that I'm doing it from my stomach, we can come up with things that actually someone who was trained in it would say, what on earth are you doing? No, that's not what you do, you know?
I want to bring us back to the work for a second, specifically how you take up the body in several of the works. So you shared with us how heavy the puffer jacket is, 166, I think, kilograms.
Yeah.
And of course, in one of your films, you see a protagonist trying to wear that jacket and failing in doing that. Then you have other characters who are in the wig garment. So you're interested, it seems, in embodied experience. You're interested in the body as a site for thinking, consideration. I wondered if you could sort of just unpack that a little bit for us. What is it that makes you create these works that the body needs to sort of come into them to activate them? What is it there that you're interested in?
You know what? a lot of the times you're doing stuff and you don't know why. It just makes sense and it feels right, you know. I think when I first started making work, you work with what you've got, right? And it was the people around me that I was interested in, and so I started working with them. And I think the honesty really hooked me in, the honesty of the chainmail. And we all live in a body, right? And so that's our primal experience. That's the way we relate to the world. So being able to do stuff where you look at it and you're like, that's too heavy. Just a basic idea of exhaustion, or that body cannot move any further. We feel it, and it's an embodied experience, and that's the conversation I'm trying to have, you know. It's interesting because a lot of people are like, you're designing clothes is kind of like fashion, right? Yeah. I don't necessarily see it like that. It's art, but it's the interesting, and even the first idea I had about the chainmail and these models not making it down the runway. There's just something honest about someone reaching their physical limit, you know, that we can all somehow relate to, and it applies to work and relationships and just spirituality. There's so much. So for me, I think the body is always going to be central. The work that you're seeing there, those objects have been activated by someone's pain and honest sweat, you know. So yeah, the body for me just taps it back to us and gives a portal that we can relate to it in, yeah, or through.
And I think that there's another dimension of embodiment that comes with the experience that the viewers have when they come into the space. There is something required of us to sit with the work, right? To lean in. You know, we were talking about the sound being different. There's different levels of sound that invite a different kind of experience, but also your body needs to participate in that experience of, it's not the cinematic. Yeah. Sit back and relax. It's more like you have to bring your full attention, and your body is part of that full attention. So do you think of that, of kind of how your work is experienced? And what is the invitation, if you were to put it in those terms? Yeah,
I mean, everyone makes work for different stuff, right? So for me it's processing, but it's very much about the audience experience. I wouldn't just make something that I'm like, oh, I'm happy with, but no one is going to be able to connect with it, but that's fine. Like, I feel like I'm quite honored that people are there in the space, and I want to show respect by showing that there's time and thought there. But also just it's quite an intuitive, visceral thing, you know, slowing these things, these songs down that we're used to. All of these songs are in the public domain. A lot of people have heard them over and over and over. But kind of reframing them to a way where it makes you stop and think and slows you down. And the thing about slowing down in that space, I mean, one of the primal or basic reasons for it is just that things are so damn fast at the moment. You know, like, I'm writing a feature film at the moment, and when you're looking in that kind of film, people are saying everyone's attention span is so much shorter. Like 1 second, 5-second clips is all we're going to look at online. So for just a very basic reason, making a space that's blacked out, locked off, that you can actually slow down is a massive experience that most of us don't even get in our lives. Because for me, I'm on the laptop, then I'm doing this, and then I go to bed, then I wake up, and then so that time to just stop and absorb something, it's a nice offering, something that I feel like maybe we can all need and take that moment for.
You've spoken about healing a lot today, and I wondered if, thinking about the works, you know, you draw on your various identities. You've mentioned your Scottish origins, your Ghanaian origins, you're from the UK. Help us to think through your own grappling with this notion of healing. And I'm curious about whether or not in your conversations, your study, whether you've noticed that these different identities think of healing in the same way, whether they've converged at times, diverged at times. I'm curious about your exploration of this notion of healing through these different identities that you claim and that are part of you.
I think one thing that I'm quite interested in when it comes to healing from the colonial perspective, from the winners, if that's, I don't believe in that at all. I don't believe any of us won from that. But I think there's a fear. Healing means we don't really have the capacity, because otherwise we wouldn't have moved through. So we don't have the vocabulary to understand how things can heal, truly. So our understanding of healing is punishment, right? Revenge. And so I think that's why we're so resistant to conversations of addressing what's happened, because in the back of our minds there's this feeling of, well, ultimately what we did to other people is now going to be done to us because we deserve it by our own logic, you know. I think
I'm thinking like reparations, for example.
Reparations, or even just having those conversations is very fearful for a lot of people, you know. I mean, the British apologized, didn't apologize, you know, even just that. Yeah. Just acknowledging it officially, there's this fear of, oh, now what? Yes. Now we've got to give it all back, and again, it's scarcity mindset, because we're still in that trauma state. That's my understanding. But for me, when I'm exploring healing, I believe it's inevitable. If you truly look into history and see what has been done, and see how, despite that, people just want to get on with it. Mm-hmm. And there's so much space. The fact that we're all sitting here with our different histories in the same room, healing is inevitable. We're stopping it by not wanting to address it and being fearful for what we're going to have to give away rather than what we're going to gain. Mm-hmm. And that's because we're so pessimistic, we're so hurt, and we're so traumatized. Again, for me, it's like glaringly obvious that we're just scared of everything. But ultimately, a win-win outcome where we learn from our mistakes, learn from all of the things that we destroyed, and have an opportunity now where we're all connected and talking about that and learning. Man, it's incredible, man. It's just like how painful it's going to be to get to that point, but the healing is inevitable, and humans are incredible. And one thing that is really interesting is there's no archaeology of positive human beings who have been walking around just being nice and good. You know, you're not going to see a land clearing and mark it from that. So we're only looking at the violent bones of our past and think that that's all we are. You know, love or positive engagements with a person or an environment even doesn't leave those marks. So we feel like it was never there, right? But the whole point of not leaving a mark is beautiful in itself. Do you know what I mean? We don't have to scar our names into the world if we feel that we're enough just being there.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm thinking of the environment and, you know, discourses around not leaving our footprint, right? Which puts me in mind of what you're thinking about, you know, this idea that love is a radical act, but it's not always one that we can define or identify, because it might mean not leaving a mark.
Yeah, because love is the default, right?
Yeah.
But we don't feel that is that way. But if there's nothing there, then that, is a positive thing.
I would like to ask you, how are you building on what you've already achieved so far, and those ideas that this optimism, right? And how are you building on that in the work that you're currently making or are planning to make?
Interesting. Well, my work is just my life, so it will just manifest in so many different ways, you know. But I want to make a feature film. I have loads of art that we're making and exploring just this embodied feelings, you know, and I know we've been talking about it a lot, but actually it's not so theoretical for me. For me, it's all very visceral. Like, you come in and you feel it. You don't have to say or summarize it. There's some truth in just that experience, you know. But moving forward, I mean, it's just work that I think it needs to happen, you know, reframing it, and in whatever capacity that is. I mean, I would love to write a book with, you know, again, collaborating and bringing together thoughts around this. I'm working on some two new films now in the UK, some big ones, and then wanting to do a feature film. Quite like martial arts movies, so I want to do a martial arts film, you know, but still looking at these themes. Ideas are the power, do you know what I mean? However they manifest, whether we make films or paintings or whatever, the idea now is out there.